Tom's heart raced as he read the note, the words sending a chill down his spine. What did it mean? Who were they? Was Mrs. Roberts in danger? And if so, why hadn't she left or called for help? Tom suddenly felt very vulnerable standing in that room, in that house. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the window. He knew he needed to leave, but something compelled him to stay, to search for answers. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket, then hurried back downstairs. As he reached the front door, he paused, his hand on the doorknob. Something was nagging at him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Then it hit him. The mailbox. It was full, but there was something about it that didn't add up. Mrs. Roberts always sorted her mail, never letting it pile up. But if she was in danger, why would she leave it all in the box? And why would there be so much of it? Tom stepped outside, the cool evening air refreshing after the stale atmosphere of the house. He walked over to the mailbox and began sifting through the letters. Bills, advertisements, a few personal letters. But something was wrong. The dates. They were all dated weeks ago, long before Mrs. Roberts had last been seen. Tom's mind raced. If the mail was from weeks ago, then where had it been all this time? Why was it only now piling up in the mailbox? And more importantly, where was Mrs. Roberts? As he stood there, a cold sense of dread washed over him. He turned to look back at the house, and for a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move in the upstairs window. But when he blinked, it was gone. Tom didn't wait around to investigate further. He quickly walked back to his own house, his heart pounding in his chest. Once inside, he locked the doors and checked the windows, feeling a strange paranoia creeping over him. He tried to rationalize what he had seen, telling himself that Mrs. Roberts had simply gone away for a while, that the note was just the ramblings of an old woman with dementia. But deep down, he knew there was something more to it. Something he couldn't explain. That night, Tom couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every creak and groan the house made. He kept thinking about Mrs. Roberts, about the note, about the shadow he thought he saw in the window. And then there was the mailbox, the dates on the letters. It didn't make sense. The next day, Tom decided to call the police. He felt silly doing it. What if it was nothing? But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The officer who answered listened patiently as Tom explained the situation and assured him they would send someone to check on Mrs. Roberts. By the afternoon, a patrol car pulled up in front of Mrs. Roberts' house. Tom watched from his window as two officers got out and knocked on her door. When there was no answer, they entered the house. They were inside for what felt like an eternity before they finally emerged, looking as confused as Tom felt. One of the officers approached Tom's house and knocked on his door. Tom let him in, feeling a strange sense of foreboding. "Mr. Parker?" the officer asked, glancing down at his notes. "Yes, that's me," Tom replied. The officer nodded. "We checked the house, but there's no sign of Mrs. Roberts. The house is empty, just like you said. But there's something strange." Tom's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" The officer hesitated, then continued. "It looks like no one has lived there for weeks. The utilities were shut off a month ago, and there's no sign of recent activity. Are you sure you saw Mrs. Roberts recently?" Tom's mind reeled. He was certain he had seen her just last week, walking in her garden, collecting her mail, going about her daily routine. But now, he wasn't so sure. How could the house have been empty for weeks when he had seen her so recently? "I'm sure," Tom insisted, though his voice wavered. "I saw her last week. She was out in her garden. She waved at me." The officer frowned. "That's odd because everything we've found suggests she hasn't been here in a while. We'll keep looking into it, but I suggest you keep an eye out and let us know if you notice anything unusual." Tom nodded, but he felt a deep unease settling in his stomach. After the officer left, Tom returned to his window, staring at Mrs. Roberts' house. It was quiet now, the windows dark and empty. But something about it felt wrong, as if the house itself was hiding something.